Breaking Bad Season 3. The season opens with the aftermath of the tragic mid-air plane collision from Season 2. A symbolic representation of the chaos Walter's decisions have wrought. Jesse, meanwhile, is deeply depressed after Janae's death, isolating himself in a haze of grief and anger. The shadow of the past looms large. This episode immediately establishes the duality of the series, the personal, intimate consequences of Walter's choices juxtaposed against the larger, almost cosmic repercussions like the plane crash. Walter attempts to balance his criminal enterprise with family life, but the cracks in his moral and emotional armor are evident. Skyler begins to sense that something is amiss, her suspicions growing, while Walter's growing pride and ego begins subtly guiding him toward more dangerous decisions. The tone of the episode is one of slow-building tension and moral unease, signaling that the choices of the past cannot be undone. Walter continues to confront the consequences of his actions, but his focus begins shifting back toward building his drug empire. Jesse, struggling with depression, is barely functional, and his relationship with Walter is strained by guilt, resentment, and the lingering trauma of Janae's death. The episode emphasizes the growing tension between fatherly concern and manipulative control in Walter's character. Meanwhile, Skyler starts to assert herself more, questioning Walter's absences and suspicious behavior, laying the foundation for the domestic tension that will permeate the season. The episode also subtly introduces the operational complexity of Gus Fring's organization, contrasting Walter's impulsive, reactive style with Gus's measured, methodical approach. By the end of the episode, Jesse begins to confront the reality that he cannot escape the destructive world he inhabits, setting the stage for deeper explorations of guilt, morality, and loyalty. This episode deepens the rift between Walter and Skyler, culminating in a shocking personal betrayal as Skyler acts on her own agency, demonstrating the consequences of Walter's lies on his family. Walter's ego, combined with his desperation to maintain control, creates increasingly tense dynamics both at home and in the criminal world. The episode's narrative illustrates the interplay of desire, power, and secrecy, and the psychological toll that maintaining a double life exerts on each character. Symbolically, the episode explores the idea of choices and consequences. Small, personal decisions ripple outward with far-reaching effects, mirroring the thematic undercurrent of chaos versus control that permeates the series. Episode 4, A green light. Walter seeks to regain momentum in his operation while struggling with Skyler's growing resistance and skepticism. Jesse, meanwhile, continues his downward spiral, experimenting with drugs and pushing away potential sources of support, highlighting the self-destructive consequences of guilt and grief. Gus begins to take a more active role, observing both Walter and Jesse and evaluating their usefulness to his empire, reinforcing the idea of calculated, unemotional power. Walter's arrogance becomes more pronounced as he realizes the leverage he possesses, setting up future conflicts. The episode balances personal drama with operational strategy, showing that the criminal world is as much about psychological manipulation as it is about logistics. By the end, Walter begins to understand that to thrive, he must navigate not just the drug world but the delicate human relationships entangled within it. Gus Fring offers Walter an opportunity to expand his operation with the promise of stability and resources, testing Walter's ambition and loyalty. Jesse struggles with his role in the operation, feeling both undervalued and morally conflicted. Their contrasting approaches highlight the ethical and strategic divergences that will define the season. The delicate balance of fear, respect, and manipulation in power dynamics. A marked change from his impulsive choices in earlier seasons. Episode 6, A Sunset. The episode escalates tensions as rival drug factions and law enforcement pressures converge. Walter's relationship with Jesse is tested by conflicting loyalties, and both characters begin to realize the high stakes of their choices. Saul Goodman, as a recurring intermediary, provides a glimpse into the morally flexible, opportunistic side of the criminal ecosystem, highlighting that survival often depends on pragmatism over morality. Waltera's relationship with Jesse is tested by conflicting loyalties, and both characters begin to realize the high stakes of their choices. The episode uses suspense and confrontation to underline the precariousness of Waltera's ascent, while visually and narratively exploring the contrast between the ordinary suburban life he attempts to maintain and the violent, high-stakes criminal world he increasingly inhabits. While visually and narratively exploring the contrast between the ordinary suburban life he attempts to maintain and the violent, high-stakes criminal world he increasingly inhabits. The episode uses suspense and confrontation to underline the precariousness of Waltera's ascent, while visually and narratively exploring the contrast between the ordinary suburban life he attempts to maintain and the violent, high-stakes criminal world he increasingly inhabits. This episode is pivotal for its intense focus on immediate danger and the consequences of Walt and Jesse's actions. The tension between impulsivity and careful planning is highlighted, and Jesse begins to gain more agency, moving from reactive to proactive behavior. Waltera's role as a manipulator and strategist becomes more pronounced, signaling his increasing comfort in operating outside moral constraints. The stakes are now life and death, forcing characters to confront the tangible consequences of their decisions. The episode's climactic shootout demonstrates that the stakes are now life and death, forcing characters to confront the tangible consequences of their decisions. Themes of loyalty, betrayal, and survival dominate, with the episode using suspense and pacing to reflect the escalating tension in both personal and professional spheres. As Walter White's grip on reality begins to slip, his loved ones start to notice the changes in his behavior. Skepticism and concern etch the faces of those around him, but he pushes them away, desperate to keep his secret safe. The tension builds as Walter's actions become more erratic, and those around him begin to suspect the truth. The lines between reality and delusion blur as Walter's world begins to collapse around him. Walter and Jesse continue to navigate the consequences of the violent confrontation, grappling with legal, personal, and ethical implications. Jesse's guilt over past actions, particularly the deaths he feels responsible for, becomes increasingly heavy, while Walter's strategic mind seeks to exploit situations for advantage. Gus's observation of both men underscores the season-long theme of surveillance, evaluation, and manipulation. The episode further develops the psychological landscape of the characters, portraying the intersection of ambition, fear, and moral compromise, as Walter's transformation into Heisenberg becomes increasingly complete. Episode 9, A Kafkaesque. The title references the surreal, bureaucratic, and morally complex world the characters inhabit. Walter faces pressure from Gus to continue production, while Jesse struggles with ethical dilemmas surrounding distribution and sales. The episode emphasizes the mental strain of living double lives, showing that moral compromise and ambition create internal conflict that can be as dangerous as external threats. Subtle power plays between Walter, Jesse, and Gus highlight themes of hierarchy, trust, and manipulation, with each decision carrying long-reaching consequences for both survival and identity. Often cited as one of the most psychological episodes of the series. Almost entirely set in the meth lab, focusing on Walter and Jesse's obsessive search for a fly that represents contamination and distraction. The episode functions as a character study, examining Walter's guilt, obsession with control, and fear of losing his carefully constructed world. Jesse serves as a mirror to Walter's moral reflection, challenging him to confront the consequences of his actions. The minimalist setting intensifies the psychological drama, emphasizing themes of obsession, responsibility, and existential anxiety, showing that the real danger often lies not in external threats, but within the psyche itself. Skillera's moral agency grows as she confronts her own boundaries and seeks autonomy, juxtaposing Walter's increasingly manipulative behavior. Jesse forms a tentative romantic connection, suggesting a potential for redemption and emotional grounding, but the shadow of the criminal world continues to loom. Gusa's influence is felt more strongly, pushing Walter to consider long-term strategic implications of his actions. The episode explores themes of choice, control, and the interplay between personal desire and moral consequence, setting up narrative threads that will become central in the season finale. Episode 12, A Half Measurisa. This episode illustrates the consequences of moral compromise and the danger of indecision. Walter faces ethical and strategic dilemmas as he attempts to protect Jesse and assert his authority within the drug operation. Jesse confronts the limits of his moral tolerance, leading to a dramatic and violent resolution. Jesse's confrontation with his moral limits serves as a thematic precursor to the escalating tension of the finale. The episode emphasizes that half-hearted solutions often exacerbate problems. This serves as a thematic precursor to the escalating tension of the finale. The careful pacing and tension highlight the cost of inaction and the corrosive effects of moral ambiguity. The season finale delivers a high-stakes climax, with Walter forced to make irrevocable choices that cement his transformation into Heisenberg. The murder of Gail Boetticher, orchestrated to secure Walt's survival and maintain control over the meth operation, marks a turning point in his moral trajectory. The episode masterfully blends suspense, moral ambiguity, and character evolution, leaving viewers with a sense of both resolution and anticipation for the increasingly dark and complex path the characters will follow in Season 4. The finale underscores the Season-3's central theme, the inexorable consequences of ambition, pride, and moral